Hello everyone, my name is Simon. Today I'm going to talk about the difference between a traditional transmission and a continuously variable transmission, also known as CVT. So first, let's take a look at a traditional manual transmission. In a traditional setting, power is generated in the engine, which is then delivered to the input shaft of the transmission. Now the goal here is to transmit the power from the input shaft to the output shaft. That power will then be used to move the wheels. Now to do so, there are many ways, but in the traditional transmission, what we have are sets of meshing gears. There we go. Let's assume we're working with a 3-speed transmission. So these things are gears. So we have our first gear, second gear, and third gear. So in the first gear, we have a smaller gear driving a larger gear. There we go. This is necessary because when the vehicle starts moving, there's a lot of friction and loss of heat, and lots of torque is required. And in this case, we can develop a lot of torque by having a smaller gear driving a larger gear. So let's assume there are 10 teeth on the smaller gear or input gear, and let's say there are 30 teeth on the output gear. So in this case, for every full rotation the input gear makes, the output gear would make 1/3 of a rotation. So so as we can see, the input gear moves a lot faster than the output gear. At the same time, there's a lot of torque delivered to the output gear. So as the vehicle picks up on its speed, we can then switch gears from first to second, and then from second to third. So when we are in the third gear, now we have a large gear driving a smaller gear. Let's assume there are 30 teeth on the large gear and 10 teeth on the smaller gear. In that case, for every full rotation the input gear makes, the output gear would make 3 rotations, which means while the engine speed stays the same from first to third, the wheel speed would increase by 9-fold. And this ensures that the best fuel economy can be achieved. Now here comes the really important question. How do we change gears, or how do we engage gears? So this is done by a device called synchronizing device. So to show how a synchronizing device works, first we have to know how the gears works. The gears on the input shaft are fixed in place. By that I mean, as the input shaft moves or rotates, the gears on the input shaft rotates at the same speed. On the other hand, the gears on the output shaft move freely. So as the input shaft moves, the input gear drives the output gear. All at the same time, the output shaft moves freely. So to demonstrate how to engage in one of the gears, I made a little device. There we go. So the notepad here is our output gear, and the pen is the output shaft. So as you can see, the output shaft moves freely, and the gear when it's not engaged. So when the driver decides to engage in one of the gears, we can induce a lot of friction between the shaft and the gear, forcing them to mesh together. So before, the gear moves freely on the shaft. There we go, moves freely on the shaft. And when we decide to engage in one of the gears, we put a lot of pressure on the gear, forcing the gear and the output shaft to mesh. So now they can move at the same speed. And when that happens, we're gonna put a lock between them and make sure they don't fall out of place. And that is how a traditional transmission works. Now we move on to CVT operation. Unlike the traditional transmission operation, CVT does not use a gear assembly. Instead, it uses pulley and belt assembly. So as you can see in this picture, we have our shaft that goes into the pulley assembly. And in this picture, the pulley is fully closed in, and this is done by applying pressure to the pulley housing, forcing the two plates between the pulley to close in on each other, which in turn forces the belt, which is this, to sit on the outside of the pulley. So virtually the pulley looks like this. And in the second picture, we have the pressure fully released, and now the housing moves back to its original position, and there's more gap between the plates, allowing the belt to move to its original position, which is very close to the center. And virtually, this is what the pulley looks like. Now, with that in mind, we can now go to the operation of the pulley assembly. So, on our again, power is delivered by the engine to the input shaft, which moves with the pulley assembly. In the first gear, in order to achieve maximum torque, we must have a large pulley driving a smaller pulley. And that's why the pressure is applied to the housing, forcing the belt to sit on the outside of the pulley. On the output shaft, in order to achieve maximum torque, we have the pressure released, allowing the belt to sit on the inside of the pulley, and it looks like this. And as you recall, this is exactly what the first gear should look like. You have a large gear driving a smaller gear, so the large gear would move a lot faster than the smaller gear, which means there's more torque being delivered to the smaller gear, or to the output gear. As the vehicle picks up on speed, now we can change the gap between the two plates by applying or releasing certain amount of pressure between this assembly and this assembly, which allows us to achieve virtually any gear ratio we want, and eventually to achieve the maximum gear ratio, which would look like something like this. And the advantage with this assembly is that because there's no engaging gears, the ride comfort is superior to that of a traditional transmission, and also fuel economy is a lot better, since the computer can instantaneously change the gear ratio between the input and the output. And now the problem with this design is that the belt that sits on the pulley gets worn out fairly quick, because there is no gear meshing against each other, and there we can put a lot of torque on the belt, otherwise it would slip. And that concludes my presentation on a traditional transmission and a CVT transmission. Thank you for your time.